Welcome everybody to Question of the Week. This is a Facebook Live session where I take on your science faith questions. Mondays, 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 12:30 in the afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. My goal is to try to originate these broadcasts every Monday, but unfortunately lately my travel schedule has prevented me from doing that. Last Monday, I was in Istanbul, Turkey, taking part in the Second International Conference on the Origin of Life and the Origin of the Universe. And because I was in Istanbul, I just simply couldn't pull off a Facebook Live session. Hopefully, as the summer rolls around, we'll get back into the swing of things in short order. But until then, we'll try to originate these broadcasts whenever we can. This week's question comes from two people, Brian Brock and Stephen Joyner, both of who are my Facebook friends, who sent me links to an article that claims that the birthplace of humanity was in Europe, not in Africa, and they wanted to know my perspective as an Old Earth Creationist on that recent scientific claim. This discovery made headlines and articles were appearing all over the place on the internet. And so because of that, I thought that this would be a great topic to take on for Question of the Week. And by the way, if you are following along at home, keeping score, so to speak, this is the third session in a row in which Stephen Joyner has asked a question that made it to the Question of the Week status. So congratulations, Stephen, on pulling off a hat trick. We'll see if you can get 4 in a row. I'll take on that question here in just a minute, but before I do that, a couple of things that I do want to do. One is to wish everybody a happy Memorial Day. This is a special broadcast. I'm broadcasting from my home instead of the RTB offices because, of course, our offices are closed so that we can, as a RTB community, celebrate Memorial Day. And in my view, Memorial Day is really a sacred holiday. This is the day in which we remember those people who paid the ultimate sacrifice, who gave up their lives so that we can enjoy the freedoms that we experience here in the United States. And I hope that if I was ever asked to pay that kind of a price, to make that kind of sacrifice, that I would be able to step up to the plate and do it with honor and dignity, as so many great Americans have done before me. And so I want to just say thank you to all the families who've had loved ones who have died for the sake of this wonderful country. There is no amount of gratitude that we can express to you that would ever compensate you for the sacrifice that you made. But if it wasn't for that sacrifice, again, America could never be the great nation that she is. So again, happy Memorial Day to all of you. If you are watching this broadcast, please check in the comment section. Let us know who you are, where you're watching from. This is actually very helpful information for us. Also, react to the broadcast. Use the like button and respond, react to the broadcast. This is actually very important because the more reaction that we get to the broadcast, the more comments that we receive, the greater the visibility that this broadcast will receive in Facebook streams, which helps us to distribute this broadcast more widely. So please play your role in doing that. And then finally, I also want to hear from you. I want to know what your perspective is on this particular discovery, even if your perspective is different from mine, even if your perspective disagrees from mine, because what I want to do is create an environment on my public figure page as well as on my personal page where people can discuss science faith issues without censorship, without any kind of restriction. As long as those discussions are civil, I'm happy to see people air dissenting viewpoints. Those viewpoints are so valuable. Okay, without any further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at this week's question. And the news items that Stephen Joyner and Brian Brock sent my way were based on a couple of papers published recently in a journal called PLOS One, PLOS One, which stands for the Public Library of Science. This is an open access journal where the articles are available to anybody to download, whether you have a subscription to the journal or not. And it was work done by researchers who recently dated the locations in which a couple of very interesting fossils were discovered during World War II. About 1944, a German scientist by the name of von Frieberg discovered two fossils, a mandible in Athens, Greece, the lower jaw, and the fourth premolar in a location in Bulgaria, that were assigned to an ape-like creature called Gracopithecus freybergi at the time. That was the name given to these specimens. People initially interpreted these creatures as essentially apes, fossilized apes. However, the recent dating indicated that the jawbone was about 7.1 million years in age, and that the molar was about 7.2 million years in age. Now, this is a very interesting age regime because this is about the time that scientists think that, from an evolutionary perspective, that humans and chimps diverged from a common ancestor. And the standard evolutionary model argues that this common ancestor lived in Africa, because this is where we have a preponderance of early hominin fossils. We have creatures like Sahelanthropus chadensis that dates between 6 to 7 million years in age, that many people think may have been one of the very first hominins. This creature looks as if it had bipedal capabilities based on the location and the shape of its foramen magnum, which is the opening at the base of the skull. That opening at the base of the skull that receives the spinal cord has a characteristic location and shape for creatures that walk erect. We also have Aurora tugenensis, discovered in the Tugen Hills in Africa. This is primarily postcranial remains that we have for this creature. And from the femur, it looks as if this creature was bipedal. And then finally, we have Ardipithecus ramidus that dates between 5.2 and 5.8 million years in age. This species is known from Ardi, a nearly complete set of remains. And again, it looks as if this creature walked erect, a creature that many people think was the transitional form giving rise to the Australopithecines. And by the way, Aurora tugenensis, I don't think I mentioned, dates between 5.8 and 6.3 million years ago. So all of these are considered to be early hominin species, close to what we think the last common ancestor might have been, but none of them qualify as the last common ancestor. But because Gracopithecus specimens now date at about 7.1 to 7.2 million years in age, this is really, really very interesting because it suggests that maybe this creature may give us some insight into the last common ancestor. And so this prompted the researchers to go to museums and to collect these specimens and then analyze them. Of particular interest was the fourth premolar. As it turns out, the fourth premolar is diagnostic for hominins. That is, you can distinguish between a hominin and an ape from the fourth premolar root structure. With apes, the roots of the fourth premolar are distinct, whereas in hominins, those roots fuse. And this fusion of the roots is considered to have no adaptive advantage. So from an evolutionary perspective, it's an ideal diagnostic trait for hominins. It's kind of a neutral trait, if you will, from the standpoint of selection. And lo and behold, micro CAT scan imaging of this fourth premolar indicates a fused root system, suggesting that Gracopithecus was actually a very early hominin. And the question then is, could it be that this creature was one of the very first hominins. Maybe this could actually be that creature that represents the last common ancestor. Interestingly enough, that means it places the origin of humanity, if this model is correct, in Europe, not in Africa. The researchers argue at that time the climate of that environment would have rendered the environment an open savanna, which would have provided, presumably, the evolutionary driving force for the emergence of bipedalism. And they argue that this creature or related creatures like it could have migrated into Africa shortly after 7 million years ago in the 6 million year regime. And it's in Africa where the diversification of the hominins took place, producing Aurorantugenensis and Ardipithecus ramidus and, say, Helanthropus chadensis, and perhaps maybe other species that are yet to be discovered. Of course, this is a radical claim because traditionally evolutionary biologists have argued that Africa is the location for humanity's evolutionary origin because this is where the hominin fossils are found. And so there is resistance that's being met by the researchers who make this claim because, again, it flies in the face of the standard model. It flies in the face of the bulk of the fossil record and the fossil evidence. But nevertheless, I think these researchers have done very fine work. And if, again, a fused root system is diagnostic of a hominin, it clearly indicates that Grecopithecus was a hominin, not an ape fossil. So much more to be, I think, discussed and learned about this hominin and how it might fit into the evolutionary framework as time goes on. This is really, again, I think, a very important discovery. Now the question is, how do I react to this discovery as an old Earth creationist, as somebody who is skeptical about the evolutionary paradigm and the idea that human evolution took place? To be clear, as an old Earth creationist, I recognize that the hominin fossil record is legitimate. It's a real record describing a real natural history for creatures that existed between 6 to 7 million years ago and even as recently as several thousand years ago for creatures like Homo floresiensis and Neanderthals. I think that's a real fossil record. I am skeptical that this fossil record actually reflects an evolutionary origin of humanity, and I am skeptical that this fossil record can be used to justify evolutionary relationships among the various hominin species. And in fact, this particular discovery beautifully illustrates some of the reasons for my skepticism. For example, here we go again where there's another scientific advance in paleoanthropology that shakes the evolutionary tree, that uproots the evolutionary tree, that rewrites human evolution. These are all headlines that we hear every time a new hominin fossil find is announced, whether it's of a new species or just simply a new specimen for existing species, or in this case, a reanalysis of fossils that have been known for almost 60 years now. If a scientific theory is robust, if that scientific theory is well on its way to providing us with an explanation for some phenomena in nature, new discoveries, new advances should bring clarity and crystallization. These new insights should maybe fine-tune the theory from time to time, but as it fine-tunes the theory, it's going to create scenarios where that theory has even greater explanatory power and makes even better sense of the existing data. This is not the case when it comes to human evolutionary models. New discoveries create chaos, and that chaos only intensifies as new discoveries are made. This is a beautiful illustration of that point, where standard ideas that are part of the standard evolutionary story for human evolution, cornerstone ideas, wind up turning out to be false, turning out to be overthrown by single fossil finds or single reanalyses of fossil remains. That to me is a sign, is a signature as a scientist that there's something wrong with that paradigm. And I suggest that what's wrong with it is it's the wrong paradigm for understanding the hominin fossil record. Moreover, this particular discovery represents a failed prediction of the human evolutionary model. When Darwin proposed his theory of evolution in The Descent of Man, applying it to human origins, again in the book The Descent of Man, he made the prediction that we should discover transitional intermediates for human evolution either in Africa or Asia, because this is where the great apes were found. This is where old world monkeys were found. And because of their biogeographical distribution, Darwin argued that Asia or Africa would be the birthplace of humanity. And I can't tell you how many times I've engaged evolutionary biologists who have said, with respect to the hominid fossil record, that this is an example of where evolution has made a successful prediction. Darwin predicted that human evolution would begin in Africa. It would come out of Africa or out of Asia. And the fact that we have fossils for hominids in Africa and in Asia satisfies Darwin's prediction. But if this finding regarding Gracopithecus stands, it is a failed prediction and needs to be acknowledged as such. And it's interesting because this failed prediction follows on the heels of another high-profile failed prediction that we talked about 2 weeks ago on the May 15th broadcast when we talked about the recent work with Homo Naledi. This particular hominid was discovered again a few years ago in South Africa, and given its mosaic characteristics, people argued that this is a transitional form, or a likely transitional form, linking the Australopithecines to the Homo genus, supplanting Australopithecus sediba, Australopithecus afarensis, Homo habilis, that this was a likely transitional intermediate. And given its anatomy, the prediction was this creature should be between 2 to 3 million years in age. Lo and behold, when this creature was dated, we discover that it actually is 200,000 to 300,000 years in age. That represents a failed prediction. So here we have, in the span of about a month, 2 examples of failed predictions for the evolutionary paradigm. Now, one could argue that these failed predictions are not enough to reject human evolution. Fair enough, but they do represent failed predictions. And again, for somebody like me, who is an Old Earth Creationist, who is skeptical of human evolution, this justifies that skepticism. The chaos created by this discovery, along with the added chaos from that we see every time new hominin remains are unearthed and are reanalyzed, and again, these failed predictions, again, represent justification, I think, for rejecting human evolution. But there's more, because if human evolution is true, if humans and chimps share a common ancestor, then we should be able to identify and characterize from the hominid fossil record what the last common ancestor would look like. We should be able to reconstruct it. And the fact of the matter is, we simply can't do that. We cannot identify any kind of creature in the hominid fossil record that points us to a unique and consistent set of characteristics that the last common ancestor would have. The traditional evolutionary model is that this ancestor was a knuckle-walking, ape-like creature, that it would have moved through the trees, it would have had arboreal locomotion, and it would have originated in a grassland environment, where that grassland environment would have created environmental pressures that would have forced that ape, which would have normally lived in a woodland environment, to stand erect in order or to more appropriately evolve bipedalism for a whole host of adaptive reasons. But the fact of the matter is, it's questionable if bipedalism emerged in an open savanna. It looks as if it has originated in a woodland environment. that with this discovery, it doesn't look like that origin happened in Africa. It happened perhaps in Europe. At least the data is suggestive of that if you take the work on Grecopithecus seriously. But also, there have been recent studies suggesting that the hand that is displayed by the Homo genus, that is ideally adapted for tool use and manipulating objects, is actually primitive. That the last common ancestor wasn't knuckle walking, but actually had hands like modern humans, like members of the Homo genus, and that the knuckle walking features are actually derived characteristics that chimpanzees display. Of course, this is now problematic because Australopithecines seem to have hands that look like they had actually retained some knuckle walking capability. So again, there's chaos and uncertainty about what the nature of the last common ancestor has. There are people that argue the shoulder structure of that last common ancestor would have been like that of the great apes, allowing it to move through trees. And so the shoulder structure of chimps would be a primitive feature, not a derived feature, though the hands would be derived features, not primitive features. So my whole point is this: try as we might, we've not been able to come up with any kind of clear picture that matches what we would have predicted for the nature of the last common ancestor, given again what we see in human evolution textbooks regarding the standard model for what, again, that last common ancestor would look like. We are getting incoherent, contradictory results from the fossil record as we try to reconstruct that story. But the point is, the standard story doesn't hang together. But it's not just limited to chimpanzees where we see problems, again, identifying the last common ancestor in the hominid fossil record. Homo heidelbergensis, for example, is considered to be the last common ancestor, giving rise to modern humans and Neanderthals as two separate evolutionary lineages. The problem is we can't demonstrate that Homo heidelbergensis was actually that last common ancestor. There was a study done a few years ago, and I write about this, and then articles about this is available on our website. Also, it's found in the updated, expanded edition of Who Was Adam, where researchers took 1,200 teeth from modern humans and from Neanderthals, and they tried to reconstruct what the tooth structure would look like for the last common ancestor. And once they had that reconstructed tooth structure, they compared it to Homo heidelbergensis. It didn't match. In fact, it didn't match Homo erectus or Homo antecessor. They could find no match for it in the fossil record whatsoever. So here's again another instance where we have these standard models for what the last common ancestor would have looked like, or the identity for the last common ancestor, but when we probe that, when we try to confirm that, we're unable to do so. So this study is, I think, a beautiful example of, again, the many different problems associated with trying to understand the hominid fossil record from an evolutionary perspective. Yes, indeed, there are hominids that exist. And there are a variety of different hominin species. And there are different species that live at different times in the fossil record. But any attempt to try to interpret them with any kind of precision from an evolutionary perspective winds up failing time and time again. And this discovery of Grecopithecus illustrates that beautifully. So for me, as an Old Earth creationist, this is a very interesting find. It tells us that there's a very rich natural history that we still have yet to probably unearth from the fossil record for hominins and for for ancient great apes. But at the end of the day, I don't think that this hominid fossil record supports an evolutionary paradigm, again, giving justification for somebody to embrace an Old Earth creationist perspective. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring this broadcast to a close. Thank you so much for watching. Again, please don't Don't forget to check in. Don't forget to react to this broadcast. Use the like button, let people know that you like this. If you have any feedback for us on how this broadcast could be better, please offer that to us in the comment section. If you want to offer your perspective on this discovery, feel free to do so in the comment section. And then if you want to ask questions for consideration for future broadcasts, do so in the comment section. You can send me a private message, or you can post your question on my public figure Facebook page, or even my personal Facebook page if you would like. So without any more commentary, I'm going to go ahead and wind things up by just leaving you with these final words. The more that we know about science, the more that we have reasons to believe. God bless you. I hope you enjoy your Memorial Day, and please take a moment just to reflect upon how great a sacrifice many people have made so that we could enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy here in this country, and take advantage of those freedoms to do things constructive to make the world a better place. And also, if you are a Christian, take advantage of these freedoms to share the gospel with those people that we love, because there's so many parts of the world where people do not have the religious freedom, do not have the freedom to share their faith. We're blessed to be able to do so here in this country. So again, God bless each and every one of you. Until next time, over and out.